Hello, I thought I would talk you through the multi-store model since some students tend to find this a bit tricky and it's really common in terms of exam questions. So just a reminder on the spec, it says for the multi-store model, you need to know about the sensory register, short-term memory, long-term memory, features of each store. So that's the capacity, duration and encoding that you have already looked at. Now, these are some key terms for multi-store model and kind of use throughout memory. Try to use the key terms wherever you can and try to not shorten anything that is a key term. So for sensory store, don't write like SS, it's sensory store. You can abbreviate the multi-store model to MSM, but try not to abbreviate anything else. There was an exam paper a few years ago where students lost marks for abbreviating parts of the system. Now, something we're not doing now, but what you have been through previously to this, you should be able to note down the differences between short-term and long-term memory in terms of encoding, capacity and duration. That's a really common exam question, so it's something you should refresh your mind on and make sure you go over so you are able to answer a question like this if it was to come up in the exam. Okay, the multi-store model. Now, this is acting in a different model. It shows how information goes through the memory system. It shows information as three separate processes. So you've got sensory memory, you've got short-term memory, and you have long-term memory. You sometimes have a question where it asks you to describe the model. You can annotate a diagram and get your AO1 marks for describing. So you see the model in a diagram here. You can reproduce this diagram in an exam and get all your AO1 marks as long as it's annotated clearly. If you don't like stuff visually like this, just learn the separate stores. It just doesn't matter how you replicate it in the exam, just make sure you can do it one way or the other, either replicate this diagram or describe the model. So you've got the sensory memory, so you've got the iconic and echoic stores in the sensory register, you've got short-term memory, you've got long-term memory, and then you've got an arrow showing the direction of information through the system, and you've got arrows showing retrieval and rehearsal and remembering there as well. If you are annotating a diagram for your AO1 marks, make sure that you annotate the arrows with retrieval and rehearsal and so on. The sensory register, that first bit, it describes what happens to information when it first comes into our memories. You need to know the difference between iconic and echoic memory, and you need to be able to describe that. So make sure that you know what the sensory register is. Don't miss it out. A lot of students go straight to short-term memory. You need the sensory register first. Just make sure that you can describe it quite well. And there's some notes on here that you can look at. In terms of short-term memory, we've been through capacity, so it's up to 30 seconds. You've got that Miller's Magic 7, so it holds between 5 and 9 items. Encoding is visual and acoustic, and information, if it's rehearsed, it's passed on to long-term memory. So that's maintenance rehearsal, saying something over and over again. Short-term memory, you can abbreviate to STM, but I would write out short-term memory in full if you were talking about it in an exam question. We can hold more information in our short-term memory if we use a technique called chunking. So instead of remembering between 5 and 9 numbers, we can chunk numbers, for example, into pairs of digits or kind of 3 digits at a time in order to remember more. There's a lot of experiments that you can use to demonstrate this, but chunking is a technique by which we can try to hold more information in short-term memory. And that's a key term that you need to know. That's something you can talk about in an exam. Long-term memory potentially has limitless capacity and duration, and it encodes semantically, so it's all about meaning. That's kind of the difference between short-term and long-term memory so far. Now, there's lots of exam questions that refer to the multi-store model, but they're AO2 questions, so they ask for application. For example, like this one, this is talking about rehearsal. and how rehearsal is necessary to move information from short-term to long-term memory, but also to retrieve information from long-term memory. So have a look on Caboodle, have a look in your textbook for some application, for some AO2 questions on the multi-store model. Multi-store model is a really common topic for exam questions, and it's anything from, you could get a 1-mark question on multi-store model, you could get a 16-mark question on the multi-store model. So practice as many questions as you can. In terms of long-term memory within the model, you need to know the differences between the different types of long-term memory, so episodic, semantic, and procedural, and you'll have notes on that as well. The primacy recency effect is an effect demonstrated by an experiment that supports the multi-store model. So the primacy recency can be used as research support for the multi-store model. It's if people have read a list of words, they tend to remember the stuff at the start and the stuff at the end of the list better, and they tend to forget the stuff in the middle. It suggests that the primacy effect is that information has been moved into long-term memory from which it can be retrieved, and the recency effect is information is still in short-term memory and it's retrieved from there. So primacy recency is an example of research to support the multi-store model. Those are the results from the test. You can also use Barrick's yearbook study to support the multi-store model. It supports the idea of long-term memory and how we can access information from long-term memory. So Barrick's study can be used as research support for the model as well, focusing on retrieval from long-term memory. Baddeley's semantic acoustic study can be used to support the model in terms of describing encoding in long-term memory, because it suggests that short-term and long-term memory are separate stores. So they're unitary stores, like the model shows. They're separate stores, they're separate boxes. So Baddeley's acoustic and semantic study can be used to support the multi-store model. HM, so Henry, can also be used as research to support the multi-store model. There's a few case studies of people where they're known by their initials, so HM and KF. And then you've got Clive Waring as well in terms of memory. Try to get these case studies clear in your head. Don't get them muddled up. So HM is Henry. He suffered brain damage due to some ill effects of an epilepsy operation. His hippocampus was removed. He suffered problems with his memory. He couldn't form new long-term memories, but he had short-term memory. So Henry can be used as evidence to support the idea that short-term and long-term memory are separate stores, and also that they're stored, the stores exist, in separate parts of your brain. So you can use Henry as a case study. There's a nice TED video on the hippocampus and memory. It links to Henry that you can watch if you'd like to. I'm not going to talk you through it now, so let's get rid of that. And then that's just what happened to HM's brain, so you can link HM. HM is really useful throughout the memory course, so make sure that you kind of know what's going on there. HM can also be used to link back to Peterson and Peterson's study in terms of duration, so you can link that back to the work that you did there. Just as a side, if anyone is interested in looking more at HM, there's some good documentaries about him online. His brain was also used after his death to investigate kind of brain structure and hippocampus, and it's something, if I teach you biopsychology, we'll look at later on when we look at biopsychology and structure of the brain. KF is a separate case study. KF had a motorbike accident. KF had problems with acoustic information. He didn't have any problems with visual information. KF can be used to criticize the multi-store model. The multi-store model says short-term memory is one unitary store, so it's one block. The case of KF suggests that that's too simple. It's reductionist to say that short-term memory is just one store. So KF can be used to criticize the multi-store model. There is also a research methods evaluation point you can use in terms of the multi-store model to do with investigator or experimenter bias. This is because case studies are used a lot, or lab studies are used a lot, so there's potentially influence from researchers in the research that you're looking at. Multi-store model says that if we rehearse information, it gets passed to long-term memory, and if we and then we can access it later on and we can retrieve it. However, there is research that suggests that it doesn't matter how much rehearsal we do, it's about the type of rehearsal that we do. This is where rehearsal is classified as either maintenance rehearsal or elaborative rehearsal. So it's worth knowing the difference between those two types of rehearsal. And if you look in the booklet and look in your textbook, make sure that you know the difference between maintenance and elaborative rehearsal. When you're evaluating the multi-store model, you can also say it's based on lab experiments, so it has high control, but it lacks low ecological validity. It's oversimplified. It's an example of machine reductionism. It assumes that there's a single short-term memory and there's a single long-term memory. And it assumes that it's just one simple kind of linear model where you've just got these three boxes and everything moves really neatly in one direction and the same thing happens for everyone. And that is not the case. Research has proved otherwise. This is just a summary of research that you can use when you're discussing the multi-store model. You don't have to use it all. You don't have to remember the names of the study because none of these are named on the spec, but it's just for reference when you're talking about the multi-store model. I've just summarized the kind of advantages and disadvantages, strengths and weaknesses, strengths and limitations, evaluation points of the multi-store model in case this came up as a 16-mark question. For any of these AO3 points that you are using, you need to try to link them to issues and debates. You need to link them to research. You need to give specific examples from parts of the model. That's what you would need to do to kind of get a full AO3 point from the stuff that's in these boxes. But this is here for you to use if you do ever come across a 16-mark question on the multi-store model. Okay, thank you.